Welcome back. This is Karthikeyan. I'm a developer advocate at 100ms. Without wasting any time, let's begin. This is episode 2 of Building Wordle with live video in Flutter with 100ms. We will be focusing on the game logic of the app in this episode. If you have missed the previous episode, click on the top right corner of the screen or check the link in the description. Let's start the episode by understanding the state management we're going to use for the logic. First, we will create a class GameKit that will extend the change notifier. It will have its own properties and methods. Then, we will use the provider package to actually provide a GameKit object to some widget. Let's call it some widget. You can access this GameKit object that you just created inside the provider in the some widget. You do this by calling the function context.watch with the type GameKit. Now you have this GameKit object in hand. You can access all of its properties and methods. Here we are just showing the round number in a text widget. Now comes the question, how do I listen to updates? What if round number changes? So we have this function next round inside the GameKit which does increment the round number. It also calls this special function called notify listeners. What it does is, every time you call this function, it will notify everyone listening to this GameKit object. In this example, we are using context.watch to listen to this object. So the sum widget will actually be able to listen to the change. Every time the GameKit.nextRound is called, the sum widget will actually re-render to get and show the updated value. And that's it. So I've created the class GameKit inside the file gamekit.dart, which is under the logic folder. And I've also moved the models folder inside of logic. Now we'll take a look at this class. Just like we saw a few minutes ago, it's extending the change notifier. And these are the properties that this GameKit has. And these will be the methods that it will enclose. Let's go one by one. First is word size. Word size is the number of letters you have in a word, which in our case is 5. Number of guesses. Usually, in a Wordle game, you would have 6 guesses, but in our app, we're just going to have 5 to make space for the meeting tiles. Guess words. So this is of type list of word, and we will be appending a word object every time the user makes a valid guess. Actual word. So this will be the word object that you have to guess against. So this is the most important property that you would have in the whole game. Current guess number. So this usually represents the ith guess you're making right now. And every time you make a valid guess, we will be incrementing it. Current guess word string. So this is where we'll be storing the string until you press that enter button on the keyboard. So this property, it will be totally controlled by the keyboard widget that we have. Next one is current guess status. So this is of type guess status. Let's see what we have here. So guess status is a enum with 2 values, valid guess and an invalid guess. So we will be using this to tell the UI if it's a valid guess or an invalid guess. In case of an invalid guess, we will have to show a toast message that it's an invalid guess. Next one is isWin. So we are using this to actually show like a flag if the game is over and the player has won or not. So we have these 2 left out. I will come back to it after a few minutes. Now let's look into the methods. So first one is init method. We will be using this to load some assets that we need to actually play the game. Next one is start new round. So this is the method that you would call for the first time when you enter the game, and every time you have finished the game and you want to reset it, you call this one. Next up is make guess. This method, we call it to actually make the guess. So what it will do is, it will take this current guess word string, it will check if it's valid or not. If it's invalid, then it will update the current guess status, and if it's valid, then it will make a word object out of it and compare it with the actual word and then add it to the guess words. Next is update guess word. So this accepts a string, updated guess word string, and what it does is it just sets this current guess word string to this new updated guess word string. That's all. We'll be calling this primarily from the keyboard part of the UI. Now that we know what the methods are meant to do, we'll start working on the logic. We're missing something, aren't we? Yes, the word collection that we need to actually pick the actual word and the valid guesses from. Let's go and pick them up. So I found these two GitHub gists from C Freshman, and this one is for answers and this one is for allowed guesses. So we have two text files full of words that we need to actually make this game. So I have now added these files to the assets folder and I've named them answerwords.txt and validwords.txt. Now let's add this in the pubspec.yaml. So I've added both of these files as an asset. Now hopefully it's accessible inside the app. Coming back to the game kit, let's start with the init method. So in this method, we will be loading both of these files into separate variables that we can use them throughout the app. We do this by getting the string from the file by calling the method rootBundle.loadString. So once we have the string, we'll split it and load it in a variable of type list_of_string. So these are the two variables that I was talking about. So one is answer words list and the next one is additional word list. Now let's start with the start new round. We start the method by assigning the actual word. So how do we do this? We get a random string from this answer word list that we have and then make it a word object by calling this fromString factory method of this word class. But here I have statically typed the index 0, right? So this would just mean every time you call this function, you would have this abac as the word. So let's go and randomize this. We can do this by creating a helper class inside the utils folder under the file helper.dart, and inside of it, we'll create a method called getRandomNumber which will accept a max value. And we'll use the random.nextInt to get the random number and we'll return it. Now we'll call this method here. And what is the max value? If you go to the answerwords.txt and scroll down, you will see that it has 2315 words. So let's cap the maximum number to 2314. Now that we've randomized this, we will get a different actual word every time we call this start new round. Next up is guess words. To keep things simple, I've made this property a null safe one. We will be creating a word object even though there's no word there. So we have this factory method empty word from size where we will pass the size and it will create a word object with no string. So we have this factory method here. We just pass in the size and it will create a word object by passing in this empty string to power the letter's value. Next, we set the current guess number to 0 and the current guess word string to an empty string and the current guess word to a guess status.valid guess, and finally isWin to false. Then we call the special function notify listeners. Every time you see this function being called, it just means that the UI will re-render with all of these updated values. Now let's look at the makeGuess method. This method starts with an if condition that checks if the current guess word string is in the answer word list or in the additional valid word list. If it's not in both of them, then what we do is we'll set the current guess status to invalid guess. And we will reset the current guess word string and notify the listeners. But what if it's a valid guess? First, we'll create a word object from this current guess word string called new guess word. Then we will compare it to the actual word with a method called compare with word. So let's go and create this method first before starting this. So I've added this method inside the word class, and this method accepts an argument actual word. Let's see how it works with an example. First, we will create a list of Boolean values with every value being false of length the same as the letters in the guess word. Now let us assume that we have the actual word as acorn and the guess word as alone. The first part of this method checks if a letter is correct and in the right position. Let's see how this for loop works. Here, the A in the actual word and in the guess word match. So, it will set the status of the guess word's letter A to correct letter with position and mark the flag of index 0 to true. Next, it will check if C and L both match. No. It will now check the O from guess word and the O from the actual word match. Yes, they do. So it will set the status of the O from guess word to correct letter with position and mark the flag of index 2 to true. R and N don't match. Similarly, R and D don't match. Now comes the second section of this method. This part is responsible for checking if the letter is correct. It doesn't care about the position. Unlike the previous section, we have a for loop enclosed within another for loop. So how it works basically is, for every letter in the guess word, it will run through every single letter in the actual word. So this loop will run 5 into 5, 25 times. Let's start with the letter A from the guess word. Since the status of the A is not none, it will just move on to the next letter. Since the flag of index 0, which is associated with the letter A from the actual word, is true, we will not check it. Next, it will compare with the C. It doesn't match. Then, it will move on with the O. Since the flag is true, it will move on to the next letter. The L doesn't match with the R, then it will move to the N. L doesn't match with the N. Now moving on to the third letter from the guess word, we have the O, and this letter has the status correct letter with position the same as the letter A, which is of course not the none status that we are expecting. So we'll move on to the next letter. For letter N, we'll again iterate through the actual word. A, the flag is true, so we go to the next letter. C, N doesn't match with C. Next letter. O, the flag is true, so we move on to the next. N doesn't match with R, so we move on to the next. But now this N matches with the N. So we will update the status of the N in the guess word to letter status.correct letter and then mark the flag associated with the N from the actual word to be true. Next, we move to the letter E of the guess word. The first letter A of the actual word's flag is true, so we move on to the next. E doesn't match with C, we move on to the next. The flag of O is true, we move on to the next. E doesn't match with R, so we move on to the next. The N's flag is true. That's it. Now the guess word has been compared against the actual word and all of its letters' statuses have been updated. Now that the new guess word object has set appropriate status for all of its letter objects, let's now set it into the guess words list. We will now set this updated new guess word object into the guess words list on the index current guess number. Once that's done, we will increment it and then we'll change the current guess status to guess status.validGuess. Now that the guess is done, we have to check if the player has made the right guess or not. So we do this by calling a method on the word object, just like we did with the compare word, call isCorrect. Let's go and add it now. So we are inside the word class and this is the isCorrect method. So we just iterate through the letters and check if every single letter has this letter status, correct letter with position. If it is, then we return true, but if it's not, then we return false. So based on this, we will determine if the player has won or not. And then we set the current guess word string to an empty string and then call notify listeners. Now let's move on to the final method of GameKit, update guess word. What we do in this method is just get this parameter, updated guess word string, and then we set the current guess word string to updated guess word string, and then call the notify listeners. Simple, right? I think that's all we need to make this GameKit work. Now let's go and integrate it into the app. Let's start this by adding the provider package into the app. Now that we are here in the main dot, let's create a GameKit object. Now we'll call the GameKit.init. We have this GameKit object now that has been initialized before the app even starts running. Now all we have to do is provide it to the widgets with the help of provider package. We do this by calling the change notifier provider .value and then passing in the GameKit object as a value. So here basically we've set the material app as a child, which means every single page, every single widget that comes under this material app will have access to this GameKit object. Now let's go into the game section. Before we start doing anything with the GameKit object, let's first refactor this container that has these guess word bar list of widgets into a single widget called guess word box. Let's do it in the same file where we have the guess word bar. And let's rename this file into guess word box. Now let's place it back into the game section. Okay, now the game section looks tidy. Let's go back to our work. We are in the guess word box that we just created. Now we have this GameKit object. We got it by calling the context.watch function from the provider package with the type GameKit. So let's go and use this. Here, the place where we are mapping the list of words into guess word bar widgets, we're going to replace this with the guess words from the GameKit. Now let's go to the current guess word bar. We do the same trick for getting the GameKit object here too. So instead of this statically typed saber word, I'm going to use current guess word string. Now we are here in the game keyboard. Since this widget doesn't have anything to show on UI that depends on the GameKit, we won't be using the context.watch to get the GameKit object here. Instead, we have these three widgets, button letter, backspace, and enter to deal with. Let's start with the button letter. So we have this onTap method inside of button letter, which is a callback function that runs every time you tap on a button letter. So what we will do here is, we will append the respective letter that maps with this button letter into the current guess word string of the GameKit object. First, we'll get the GameKit object by calling context.read of the type GameKit. If you look here closely, we are using a read method instead of the watch that we just used on the previous two widgets. So, what's the difference? So, watch is a method that gets you the object reference, and every time a notify listeners function is called, it will update the value and give you the new object. But with read, you just get the current state of the object when you're calling it. And you can't use watch method outside of build functions inside a widget. And this is not a build function, so we can't use watch. Here we are getting the GameKit object and checking if the current guess word string's length is equal to the word size. If it's true, then we return it. We don't do anything. Else, we call this update guess word method with the current guess word string concatenated with the letter string that's mapped to this button letter widget. Similarly, for the backspace widget, we have this onTab method where we get the GameKit object. Then we check if the GameKit.currentGuessWord string is empty or not. If it's not empty, then we will be calling the update guessword method with the current guessword string's substring, which will have the last letter removed. And basically that's how we make our backspace key work. Moving on to the enter widget, we have this in the onTab function. So we just get the GameKit by calling context.read. Then we make a guess. So when you press the enter button, it will call this make guess method, which will do its duty and make the guess, check if the word is valid or not, and then add it to the guess words and update its status, letter status. Yeah. Then we have this if condition that checks if the current guess status is invalid. If it is, then we should show a toast message that says it's an invalid guess. For this functionality, we will use a package called OKToast. So this is the package. So what you do is you basically add the package, then import it, and in the main dot you set the OKToast as a parent of this material app. Then we can call this showToast widget anywhere throughout the app. Now let's do it. Now we've added it here, let's go and show the toast message on the game keyboard. So I have called this showToast widget inside of this if condition, and this is the widget that I want to show, and I'm setting the position to bottom. So basically I have a container with some decoration, and inside of it I have a text widget that says invalid word. That's it. Now that we've set everything in place, all that's left is to start a new round. And there's no better place to do it than the play screen. Let's start it by overriding the init state. Now that we have the GameKit object in hand, let's start the new round by calling the start new round method. That's it. We've injected everything from the GameKit into the UI. Now let's run the app and test it out. Here it is. Okay, so we are getting an error. So the error reads, set state or mark needs build, call during build. And it's happening from this call, GameKit.startNewRound. And we are making this call around here. So what's happening is we have this notify listeners inside of the start new round, and this is updating the value and it's telling the widget to re-render before it's even rendering, because we're calling it in the init state, of course. So what we'll do is we'll just remove it and then make a new method called reset round, which will call the start new round with the notify listeners. So we can use this reset round once we've played the first round and you want to reset the game again and you want to start again, you can do that. So we won't have any issues with that. But when you're just calling a method from init state, it shouldn't call notify listeners. Now let's stop the app and run it from the start again. Okay, this time no errors. Let's see if it's working. I'll make this guess apple. Okay, I'll make another guess. I think it's working. This time, let me try a gibberish word. Yep, it's working fine. Now that we have this awesome Wordle clone in our hands, it's time to make it a multiplayer one. Let's see how to do that in the next episode. Make sure to subscribe to get notified when the next episode is released over the next week. Thank you.